The claims by Michael Cohen that Donald Trump was in on a potential conspiracy at Trump Tower are the big news right now. They're being taken seriously at the White House. Donald Trump is formally denying he was in on this meeting or that he approved it before it happened. Cohen, though, reportedly willing to tell this entire allegation directly to Bob Mueller. Now, Donald Trump says no, he didn't know about the meeting, something he and his son have insisted over the last year.
Do you know at the time that they had the meeting?
No, I didn't know anything about the meeting. But you know, you gave us. It must have been a very important, must have been a very unimportant meeting because I never even heard about it.
Did you tell your father anything about this?
No. It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell.
There was nothing to tell. Do you believe Don Jr. and Donald Trump? Or do you believe these reports that Michael Cohen says there was something to tell and they were in on it? Here are the other indications that Trump had some kind of heads up. 3 hours after Don Jr. confirmed the Trump Tower meeting in an email, then candidate Trump promised a press conference with, yes, new dirt on Clinton.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week. And we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
Don Jr. says the Russians didn't give him any actionable dirt, and the promised press conference on the Clintons never occurred. But the Russians did appear to score a victory with this access to the campaign at the highest levels. And, of course, we're also learning that the Russian lawyer at the meeting was not only connected to the Kremlin, she was a high-level trusted advisor. Emails disclosed that show she worked as a ghostwriter for other Russian government lawyers, got help from senior Kremlin personnel on her own cases, and all of that helps add context to what was going on and how high level of a conspiracy this may have allegedly been. All of this swirling today with Don Jr. and Bob Mueller in the mix. And look at this quite amazing photograph that has just gone public. This is a scene you're looking at today at D.C.'s Reagan Airport. You can see Bob Mueller, the special counsel, sitting just a few feet away from Donald Trump Jr., of course, at the center of this part of the investigation, who's there on the phone, flanked by what looked to be security. That was the scene just this morning as they prepared to board their planes. I'm joined now by former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance, a conservative opinion writer for the Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin, and David Corn, who's been covering this story since day one for Mother Jones. David, as we look at that photo, and we'll put it back up on the screen, walk us through what you see between these men here, separated by just a few feet. The special counsel's office tells us Bob Mueller was not aware that that was Donald Trump Jr. and that they are not confirming that aspect of it. But what do you see in this photo?
Well, what I see is the guy in charge of an investigation and a guy who is the subject of an investigation that just got more profound. We have to preface everything, Ari, with if the account from Michael Cohen is true, blah, blah, blah. But so if the account is true, it is a tremendous change in the landscape. What it does is show us two things. One, that Donald Trump, from the very beginning, was in on an attempt at collusion, attempt to conspire with a plot that was described to Donald Trump Jr. as a secret operation by the Kremlin to help Trump. So if Trump knows about that from the very beginning and is in on it, I think that has a lot of legal, but even more so political implications. Plus, if he's told about this, and even if nothing came out of the meeting, remember, throughout the whole campaign and up to now, he keeps denying or dismissing the Russian operation. Could have been a 400-pound guy in a basement. The Russians didn't do this. We don't know the Russians did this. And they kept doing that. Well, if he was told in June 2016 that Russia wanted to work with him on a secret plan to help him and hurt Hillary Clinton, and then went through all those denials, well, it shows he was covering up for Putin and for Putin's operation. So collusion and cover-up, each side of this equation just got deeper.
You say covering up for Putin, Jennifer Rubin. All of this investigative breakthrough stuff is coming on the heels of what remains a highly controversial summit between these two men. Here was Putin inviting Trump to the Moscow for a meeting today.
We are ready to invite President Trump to Moscow. Be my guest. He has such an invitation, and I told him that. I am ready to go to Washington as well. I repeat once again, if the right conditions for work are created.
Jennifer?
The right conditions for work, isn't that an ominous phrase? What does he want up front? It makes everyone, Democrats, Republicans, members of his own administration, very nervous what he is doing in these 2-hour one-on-one meetings with Putin. You know, something strikes me as David was talking about this meeting. Even the fact of the meeting, the fact that his people took a meeting with Russian operatives is itself then leverage and a reason for blackmail. Because if that comes out during the campaign, they were conspiring with the Russians, that in itself is a way of applying pressure to the president. So the president from day one has been very upset that somehow his entire presidency would be discredited by the notion that the Russians had helped him. Guess what? The Russians did help him. And if he knew about that, that's reason to fire James Comey. It's reason for him to craft a phony explanation for that meeting in Trump Tower. It's reason for a lot of behavior that seemed odd at the time, but in fact now could just be seen as a direct cover-up.
Right, and Joyce, this goes to the other part. We try to be very fair and precise here. We've had Jay Goldberg, a Trump lawyer, on, and other Trump surrogates. We had Madison Gesiotto on this week for that perspective on the Cohen news. But the only accurate way to refer to the Trump Tower set of statements from the president is that he has been repeatedly lying and caught lying about it. And that's a journalistic established fact at this point. And so what do you as a prosecutor think when you look at that? And let me look at this soundbite here from Meet the Press. When they initially lied and denied dictating this Air Force One statement. Take a look.
The president was not involved in the drafting of the statement and did not issue the statement. It came from Donald Trump Jr.
He certainly didn't dictate, but, you know, he, like I said, he weighed in, offered suggestion like any father would do.
As I say, that's not true, and it comes from the lies at the top from Donald Trump, Joyce. And so when you look at that part of it, without presupposing anyone's guilt, but just knowing that they were lying about that, and then you add Michael Cohen here potentially alleging to Mueller that Donald Trump had all this advance notice, what does that do to the investigation, in your view, as a prosecutor?
You know, the president's cover-up here, the statement that he dictated on Air Force One, has never made any sense. On the one hand, if the meeting was unimportant and, as someone said at the time, a nothing burger, then why does the president go to the trouble of lying about it? That statement that the president drafted for Don Jr. has only ever made sense if this meeting was critically important and equally important to cover up. So now what we see, if Cohen's statement is true and David Corn is correct, we need to understand whether it can be authenticated and also precisely what Cohen will have to say when he makes it. But if it turns out to be true, a lot of these pieces, puzzle pieces that are scattered across the table, start to click into place.
And we'll put up, while you're talking on the screen, we're going to put up when the president's lawyers admitted they lied about all this. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would say both on the collusion piece, collusion is a lot more likely if the president knew about this meeting in advance and authorized it. And by the same token, the obstruction part of the equation really comes into focus here. You know, we've always had this really strange statement in July where the president goes out, he's campaigning, and he says, Russia, if you're listening, here's what you can do to help me out. Find Hillary's emails. That's always seemed a little bit awkward and out of place. Perhaps we will ultimately understand that as Trump taking advantage of whatever was offered to him during this June Trump Towers meeting. Perhaps everything that they've said to us about this meeting so far has been a lie, and it really was a proffer of whatever Russia can do to help you win.
That statement that you cite was 2 years ago today. Happy anniversary, David Corn.
Yeah, and it's a statement that we know more about now because the indictment that Robert Mueller put out recently of 12 Russian military intelligence officers who were involved in hacking the Democrats to help Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. In that indictment, Mueller describes this day as the day late at night. He puts that into the indictment for a reason. Late at night, that they started targeting or trying to penetrate Hillary Clinton's own personal emails and emails of people on the campaign, as if they were taking Donald Trump's instructions and guidance. So here, you know, to go back to Joyce's point, we understand more now. If Donald Trump was told about this meeting, it means he was told that Russia wanted to help him secretly, and here he is now publicly communicating with Russia, saying, hey, this is how I want you to help. I mean, collusion, conspiracy, obstruction, cover-up, all these narratives which intertwine are bolstered by Michael Cohen's account, if true.
And so, Jennifer, when David lays it out like that, it's chilling, because the more benign earlier interpretations that were available were lower level people did this, or everyone's an idiot and they didn't really understand all the meetings they were going to. And by the way, idiot defenses can work in the law. It's not a crime to be stupid and go to the wrong meeting. What David lays out when you put these pieces together, according to Cohen's theory of the case, and we always can report there will be denials, there will be other perspectives, but according to Cohen's theory of the case, you're adding testimonial evidence that suggests, no, they weren't idiots. At a very high level, they had a lot of information that they then acted on.
And all the idiot behavior was in one direction. No one ever thought, oh, I met with the Russians, when they didn't. They kept saying they never met with the Russians when they did. Every piece of evidence that we've seen, the public statements, the private statements, the fact of the meeting, the attempt to cover up the meeting, it all makes sense only if there was an attempt to solicit help from the Russians. And if you recall, way back when, the Trump people have always said, well, what's so bad about taking a meeting like this? Anyone would take information that they were offered. That's how campaigns run. That was a very telling statement, because I think it suggests to us that that's what they thought. They thought, hey, Russians are going to help us, that's swell. And it's only been as time goes on that they realize how politically and legally perilous that was. So hence the cover-up.
Right, because you're not supposed to hijack elections with foreign governments.
Yeah, who knew, right?
Who knew? I want to
No one ever told them that, they were novices.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.